What if every tear you've shed, every scream you've released, every moment of dramatic despair has been nothing more than an elaborate performance zone where you are simultaneously the actor, the audience, and the critic? In 1889, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov discovered something that would forever change how we understand human behavior. But here's what they don't tell you in psychology textbooks. Pavlov's dogs didn't just salivate at the sound of a bell. They developed an entire ritual around their anticipated meal pacing, whining, performing what could only be described as hunger theater. Sound familiar? Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors and survived exile, understood something profound about human nature that we've somehow forgotten in our age of emotional validation. In his letters to Lucilius, he wrote, "How my pain torments me, but would it torment you less if you received it as if you were not a man but a weak woman?" This wasn't misogyny, it was a brutal recognition that we often amplify our suffering through the very act of performing it. The ancient Stoics identified what modern psychology now calls emotional amplification, the tendency to magnify our pain through the stories we tell ourselves about it. They understood that suffering has two components, the actual event and our theatrical response to it. The event is often unavoidable. The theater? That's entirely our choice. Consider Marcus Aurelius, literally the most powerful man in the world at his time, writing in his personal journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This wasn't the privileged rambling of someone who'd never faced real problems. This was a man who dealt with plagues, wars, betrayals, and the constant threat of assassination. Yet, he recognized that his responses to these challenges were the only thing truly within his control. Walk into any coffee shop, scroll through any social media feed, observe any workplace drama, and you'll witness the same phenomenon Seneca identified 2 millennia ago. We've become a society of suffering performers, each trying to out-anguish the other in an invisible competition for sympathy, attention, and validation. The neuroscientist Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett discovered that our brains literally construct our emotions based on our predictions and interpretations of events. We're not passive recipients of feelings, we're active creators of our emotional reality. When we choose to amplify our suffering through dramatic expression, we're not just expressing pain, we're literally creating more of it. But here's the disturbing truth. We've become addicted to this emotional theater because it serves hidden psychological functions. When we collapse into dramatic despair, we temporarily escape responsibility. When we rage and break things, we feel a momentary sense of power. When we wail and weep, we often receive the attention and comfort we crave. The question isn't whether these responses are natural, they are. The question is whether they're helpful. Modern psychology has identified what researchers call emotional labor, the energy required to manage and express emotions in socially acceptable ways. But there's a darker side to this concept that most people miss. We often perform emotional labor not for others, but for ourselves, creating elaborate internal theaters where we play both the suffering victim and the sympathetic audience. This creates a vicious cycle. The more dramatically we express our pain, the more real it becomes in our neural pathways. The more real it becomes, the more justified we feel in our dramatic expression. We become trapped in a feedback loop of amplified suffering, mistaking the volume of our pain for its validity. The cruelest irony. In our attempts to feel better through emotional theater, we often make ourselves feel worse. We become prisoners of our own performances, unable to distinguish between authentic feeling and manufactured drama. This is why Seneca's question cuts so deep. Did it actually make you feel better? Because when we're honest, truly honest, the answer is almost always no. The tantrum didn't solve the problem. The tears didn't change the circumstances. The rage didn't restore what was lost. All it did was exhaust us and often push away the very people we needed most. The ancient philosophers understood what modern therapy is slowly rediscovering. The path through suffering isn't around it or over it. It's through conscious, deliberate engagement with reality as it is, not as we wish it were, or as we perform it to be. What if the very chemicals designed to help us survive are now slowly killing our ability to thrive? In 1975, a Scottish researcher named John Hughes made a discovery that would revolutionize our understanding of human suffering. He found that our brains produce natural opioids endorphins that are literally more powerful than morphine. But here's the part that will disturb you. These same chemicals that evolved to help us survive physical trauma are now being hijacked by our emotional dramas, creating a biological addiction to our own pain. Every time you collapse into emotional theater, your brain releases a cocktail of chemicals that create what researchers call a stress high. Cortisol floods your system, providing a surge of energy. Adrenaline sharpens your focus. Endorphins provide relief from the pain. It's a biochemical reward system that makes dramatic suffering feel not just justified, but intoxicating. Dr. Gabor Mate, who spent decades treating addiction, discovered something shocking. Emotional trauma creates the same neural pathways as drug addiction. When we repeatedly engage in dramatic emotional responses, we're literally rewiring our brains to crave crisis. We become addicted to the very thing that's destroying us. But here's where it gets truly sinister. Our culture has monetized this addiction. Social media platforms profit from our emotional volatility. The news cycle feeds on our capacity for outrage. Even our relationships often revolve around who can generate the most sympathy through suffering. We've created a society where emotional drama isn't just tolerated, it's economically incentivized. The Stoics understood something about human nature that modern neuroscience is only beginning to confirm. We are not our emotions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." What he didn't know was that he was describing what we now call neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to literally rewire itself based on our conscious choices. When Seneca asked his friend to consider whether his emotional outbursts actually made him feel better, he was unknowingly prescribing what modern psychology calls metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about our thinking. This isn't just philosophical wisdom, it's a neurological tool that can literally change the structure of our brains. Recent studies in neuroscience have shown that when we pause to ask ourselves, "Is this helping me?" during moments of emotional intensity, we activate the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation. This single question can interrupt the neural pathways that lead to emotional amplification. But there's a deeper, more disturbing truth about why we engage in emotional theater. It works, not in terms of solving our problems, but in terms of social manipulation. When we collapse into dramatic despair, people often rush to comfort us. When we rage, people often back down. When we cry, people often give us what we want. We've learned that emotional volatility is a form of social currency. This creates what psychologists call secondary gain, the hidden benefits we receive from our symptoms. The attention, the sympathy, the temporary escape from responsibility, the sense of power that comes from watching others scramble to manage our emotions. These secondary gains often become more addictive than the primary emotions themselves. The most successful people in history understood this trap. Winston Churchill, who battled severe depression, his black dog, developed a practice of asking himself during dark moments, "What would I do if I weren't depressed?" Then he would do that thing. He didn't deny his depression. He refused to let it become the director of his life's play. Here's what the self-help industry doesn't want you to know. Healing isn't about feeling better. It's about feeling accurately. When we ask ourselves, did it actually make me feel better? We're not seeking to eliminate all negative emotions. We're seeking to eliminate the unnecessary amplification of those emotions. The ancient Greeks had a concept called ataraxia, a state of serene calmness achieved by avoiding the extremes of both pleasure and pain. This wasn't emotional numbness, it was emotional precision. They understood that peace comes not from the absence of difficult emotions, but from our relationship with them. Modern trauma therapy has rediscovered this ancient wisdom. Techniques like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and somatic experiencing work by helping people process difficult emotions without the theatrical amplification that keeps them stuck. The goal isn't to eliminate pain, it's to eliminate the unnecessary suffering we add to pain. When we begin to distinguish between authentic emotion and performed emotion, something remarkable happens. We discover that our real feelings are often much more manageable than our dramatic interpretations of them. The loss is still a loss, but it doesn't require a performance. The disappointment is still real, but it doesn't need an audience. The pain is still painful, but it doesn't have to become our identity. What if the very question that exposes our self-deception is also the key to our freedom? In 1942, Viktor Frankl was stripped of everything, his freedom, his family, his life's work, and thrown into a Nazi concentration camp. Yet in the darkest depths of human suffering, he made a discovery that would change psychology forever. He realized that between stimulus and response lies a space, and in that space lies our power to choose our response. But here's the part that will shake you. Frankl discovered that even in the most extreme circumstances, the quality of our response determines the quality of our experience more than the circumstances themselves. Every time you feel the familiar surge of emotional drama rising within you, the urge to collapse, to rage, to perform your pain, you stand at the threshold of this space that Frankl identified. In that microsecond before you choose your response, you have access to the most powerful question in human psychology. Will this actually make me feel better? This isn't about suppressing your emotions or becoming some emotionless robot. This is about wielding the most sophisticated tool humans possess: conscious choice. When we ask this question with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, we activate what researchers call response flexibility, the ability to choose our actions based on effectiveness rather than impulse. The neuroscientist Dr. Judson Brewer discovered that when we observe our emotional impulses with curious awareness rather than immediately acting on them, we literally change the neural pathways in our brains. We move from being prisoners of our emotional patterns to being their architects. Here's where everything you've been taught about emotional expression gets turned upside down. True emotional strength isn't about the intensity of your feelings, it's about the precision of your responses. The person who can feel profound grief without needing to perform it, who can experience genuine anger without destroying relationships, who can acknowledge deep disappointment without requiring an audience, this person has discovered something the ancient philosophers called emotional sovereignty. This doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means becoming response, literally, able to respond rather than merely react. When we stop performing our emotions and start experiencing them, we discover that authentic feelings are often much more manageable and much more informative than their theatrical counterparts. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius faced plagues, wars, betrayals, and the constant threat of assassination. Yet his private writings reveal not a man who suppressed his emotions, but one who chose his responses with devastating precision. He felt everything, the grief, the anger, the disappointment. But he refused to let those feelings dictate his actions. When you begin to ask yourself, did it actually make me feel better? You're not just changing your own life, you're participating in a quiet revolution. You're refusing to participate in the collective drama that keeps our society trapped in cycles of manufactured crisis and artificial urgency. This creates what psychologists call emotional contagion in reverse. When people encounter someone who can feel deeply without performing dramatically, it gives them permission to do the same. Your refusal to amplify your suffering becomes a gift to everyone around you. It shows them that authentic emotion is possible, that peace is achievable even in the midst of pain. The most powerful leaders in history understood this principle. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison, yet when he emerged, he chose reconciliation over revenge. Not because he didn't feel anger, he felt it deeply, but because he asked himself the crucial question, what response will actually create the future I want? The transformation begins with a simple practice. The next time you feel the urge to collapse into emotional theater, pause, take a breath. Ask yourself, will this actually make me feel better? Will this response move me toward who I want to become or away from it? This isn't about perfectionism or never having difficult emotions. It's about developing what the ancient Greeks called phronesis, practical wisdom. It's about becoming skilled at the art of living, about learning to distinguish between what serves your growth and what serves your ego. When you consistently choose responses that actually make you feel better, not just temporarily, but deeply and lastingly, you discover something remarkable. You have far more power over your experience than you ever imagined. The circumstances of your life may be largely outside your control, but the quality of your response to those circumstances is entirely within your domain. In the end, Seneca's question isn't just about emotional regulation, it's about the ultimate human freedom, the freedom to choose who you become in response to what happens to you. When you stop performing your pain and start processing it, when you stop amplifying your suffering and start addressing it, when you stop being a victim of your emotions and start being their conscious director, you discover that you have been carrying the key to your own liberation all along. The most profound realization isn't that you can eliminate suffering from your life. You can't. It's that you can eliminate the unnecessary suffering you add to your actual challenges. You can feel deeply without drowning. You can grieve without performing. You can be angry without destroying. You can be disappointed without despair. This is the ultimate act of self-respect, refusing to make yourself suffer more than life already demands. This is the deepest form of love, giving yourself the gift of conscious response rather than unconscious reaction. The next time you feel the familiar pull of emotional theater, remember, you have a choice. You have always had a choice. The question is, will you choose the response that actually makes you feel better, or will you choose the performance that keeps you trapped in the very suffering you're trying to escape? The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Marcus Aurelius. The revolution begins with a single question. The liberation begins with a single choice. The transformation begins with you